There are people for whom money has never been an issue because they've never had it. They live in their own world where the things we consider important are never noticed. And you know what? They don't care about what you have. They don't care about your money, simply because they've never needed it. But what happens when a person holds secrets that will leave the entire world stunned? When they found Frank Fritz dead in his bathroom, no one could believe what awaited behind the old garage door. A secret collection worth millions of dollars, with over 75 vintage motorcycles, including a 1947 Indian Chief prototype valued at $250,000, a long-lost Aerosmith vehicle, and a Yoda prototype from Star Wars that George Lucas thought had been destroyed. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The most shocking part wasn't the treasure, but the handwritten journals that revealed the dark truth about Frank's final days. Are you ready to uncover the secrets behind the screen? Don't forget to leave a comment with the number 1 if you empathize with Frank Fritz, or the number 0 if you have a different opinion. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel now so you won't miss the shocking revelations in today's story. Many people have never had money and they don't need money. So we're often rejected like that because, you know what? They don't care about those things. They don't care about your money. They've never had it and will never have it. When they found Frank Fritz dead on his bathroom floor, no one could have imagined what was hiding in his garage, a secret collection worth millions of dollars. Over 75 vintage motorcycles, including a one-of-a-kind 1947 Indian Chief prototype worth $250,000. Aerosmith's Lost Tour Bus, a Star Wars Yoda prototype that George Lucas thought had been destroyed. But the biggest shock wasn't his treasure. It was the handwritten journals revealing the dark truth about his final days. Why was he really kicked off American Pickers, and who tried to steal his $6 million fortune? Frank Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa, in 1963, and even as a child, he was different from other kids. While most kids were riding bikes or trading baseball cards, Frank filled his room with rocks, coins, stamps, and even old beer cans. The boy collected things that other kids didn't even notice. His parents, Bill and Susan, thought it was just a harmless habit. But Frank saw something in these forgotten items, something worth keeping. The boy once said he collected all kinds of paper clips from his school notebooks. It went that deep. He was even fascinated by razor blades, which seemed odd at the time. But it showed from the start that he had a keen eye for things others overlooked. As he grew up, Frank attended Sutherland High School and then Bettendorf High School. That's where he met Mike Wolf. They were in 8th grade when they first hit it off. And not long after, they started treasure hunting together on weekends at garage sales and flea markets. The two boys were drawn to the same thing. Strange, dusty, forgotten objects have stories to tell. While some teachers thought Frank could go far with traditional education, he chose a different path. He didn't view college as the place where he would learn the most important things. He believed true knowledge came from experience, from touching old things, learning their history, and discovering what made them valuable. After graduating high school, Frank took a job as a fire inspector, responsible for many vast areas of Iowa. He stayed in that job for nearly 25 years, but his collecting hobby never left him. In fact, it grew even more. As a teenager, he began buying motorcycles. He was only 16 years old when he bought a 1964 Harley Davidson for over $4,000, a significant amount of money at the time. His parents were shocked, but Frank didn't see it just as a bike. It was a piece of history, He worked hard at places like Quad City Automatic Sprinkler and Coast to Coast Hardware to pay for his new passion. Eventually, he had over 100 vintage motorcycles. He even built a barn to store them all. Every year, he participated in the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota and became a familiar face in the biker community long before he appeared on TV. What made Frank different wasn't just what he collected. It was how he collected it. He had what he called the eye of a picker. He could walk into an old warehouse or attic and see what others had missed. He spent years exploring dusty buildings, documenting where he found interesting items, and wondering about the lives of the people who once owned them. He didn't just collect objects, he collected their stories. And this approach turned him from an ordinary collector into someone who saw every discovery as a piece of history saved from the trash. Even in his job as a fire inspector, Frank's passion for collecting continued to grow. While inspecting old buildings, he often stumbled upon forgotten items. Fire helmets, alarm bells, antique tools. These weren't just forgotten tools. They were pieces of the past, and Frank knew how to spot them. His inspections became something greater. These were treasure hunts hidden behind safety reports and fire regulations. Over time, the unusual combination of these jobs, daytime inspector and a picker at heart, shaped him into the expert he would become. His inspection work honed his attention to detail. He learned to read a building, to see what others missed. That skill also helped him later when he entered antique stores or warehouses to hunt for hidden gems. He didn't just guess. He had a system. Years of scanning walls and inspecting hazards helped him spot what others overlooked. Later, that advantage helped him tremendously at American Pickers as he sifted through piles of discarded items looking for something truly valuable. There was a small moment that changed everything. Frank bought an old item for just $15, a simple thing, and then sold it for $475. That sale stuck with him. However, it wasn't just the profit, it was the impression. It was realizing that his knowledge had value. He had spent years studying these objects, and now it was paying off. That deal showed him that his passion could become a real business. From then on, he began to look at collecting differently, not just as a hobby, but as a way to build something bigger. In 2002, Frank decided to take the leap. He quit his fire inspection job and opened a store called Frank's Finds in Savannah, Illinois. It wasn't just a store. It felt like a small museum filled with firefighting gear, antique tools, and items that most people had even forgotten existed. The building itself had history. It was an old opera house with a bar, and stepping inside felt like stepping into a different era. Some visitors said it smelled musty and looked dark, but to Frank, that was part of its charm. This was his world, raw, authentic, and full of character. Over the years, the store became a hotspot for collectors and curious tourists. People came just to see the strange and wonderful items on display. Not everyone liked the arrangement. Some found it hard to navigate. But those who understood who Frank was could see the value in it. The store and everything in it had become the foundation for the next chapter of his life. When television came calling, Frank was ready. He didn't need to act. He just needed to be himself. The guy who saw treasures where others saw trash and never stopped believing that every object had a story worth telling. Before American Pickers became a hit on TV, Mike Wolfe had been hunting down old treasures with a camera in hand. Around 2002, he started filming his adventures. At the same time, his old friend Frank Fritz had just left his fire inspection job at the stable and opened his own antique shop in Savannah, Illinois. Frank was happy running his shop with vintage motorcycles, oil cans, and old toys. He didn't want to hit the road, but Mike had a vision. He believed their treasure hunting trips could be something much bigger, and he spent months trying to convince Frank to join him. Frank wasn't sure. He liked the store. It was stable. It was his. But then one day, something changed. Frank bought a small pin from a fraternity group for $115. It didn't look like much. Later, he sold it for $1,150. That moment excited him, a kind of high that he called the gambler's rush. That feeling, along with Mike's constant push, ultimately convinced Frank to give it a try. He locked up, grabbed his stuff, and hit the road with Mike. The first trips, filmed on the move, eventually became the raw material that caught the attention of television producers. When American Pickers premiered in January 2010, everything changed. Frank went from a quiet shop owner to someone millions of people watched every week. The first episode drew more than 3 million viewers, one of the biggest premieres in History Channel's history. Frank, with his beard, solid build, and calm demeanor, was the complete opposite of Mike's energetic personality. People loved him for that. In no time, fans were lining up just to see them in person. That October, they visited the California Surf Museum, and a huge crowd gathered outside. Frank was puzzled and asked, "What are all these people doing here?" But then he stayed and signed autographs until no one was left to sign for. Just 8 months after the show started, one of their episodes had reached 5.3 million viewers. Frank had become a star. Their first trips were free adventures. They drove around in a white Mercedes truck, then switched to a Ford Transit without any specific plan. In September 2011, they passed through southern Maine and happened upon Champion Auto in Arundel. The owner, Mario Burnett, was completely stunned. He watched the show every week, and now the stars were standing in his own yard. Frank bought oil cans, signs, and gas station memorabilia, while Mike focused on motorcycle gear. They spent 5 days exploring the area, completely unscripted, just following the trail and meeting people. That was the magic. 2 friends in a truck, chasing the past. One of the reasons the show worked was because Frank and Mike complemented each other in the best way. Mike was tall and skinny, full of energy and excitement. Frank was shorter, calmer, and more methodical. Mike loved old bicycles and Volkswagens. Frank hunted for toys, oil cans, and motorcycle memorabilia. When they picked through Mario's place in Maine, it was clear. Mike took motorcycle items. Frank took gas station signs. They fit together like puzzle pieces. Mike once called Frank a dreamer. Sensitive, humorous, and thoughtful. Fans saw that too, and they loved the quirky combination of the duo. Some people related to Frank's careful style. Others related more to Mike's fast-paced approach. That mix made the show feel more personal. Frank's love for motorcycles began long before the show. As a teenager, he bought a 1964 Harley-Davidson, which probably worried his parents. That was the first of many. Over the years, he built a collection of about 35 vintage bikes, stored in a warehouse that looked like a museum. He had rare Indian motorcycles, including a 1938 four-cylinder bike he found in a warehouse in Philadelphia. There were also British bikes: Vincent, BSA, Triumph. One of his most valuable items was the Von Dutch XAVW, a 1942 Harley with a frame powered by a Volkswagen engine painted to order by Von Dutch himself. Frank had seen it in a magazine decades ago and was amazed when he found it at a garage sale. That bike, like many others in his collection, told a story, and that was what mattered to Frank. In 2013, he decided to share what he knew. He wrote a book called How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles. It wasn't just for experts. He wrote it for anyone who loved bikes or wanted to start collecting. The book was filled with tips, stories, and images from his own discoveries. He explained how to find a deal, how to negotiate, and what to look for in a hidden gem. His style was simple, humorous, and clear, just like on TV. For Frank, the book was a way to pass on everything he had learned over the years. He wanted people to understand the history behind these machines and feel the same thrill he did when bringing one back to life. Frank's previous life as a fire inspector had shaped one of his passions: fire department memorabilia. After inspecting buildings for 25 years, he had access to places most collectors would never see. Abandoned firehouses, old fire stations, outdated equipment. It was all there for someone who knew where to look. He started collecting it all. Brass fire extinguishers, leather helmets, old alarm systems. Even on American pickers, you could see his face light up when they stumbled upon something related to fire. For him, it wasn't just a category, it was personal. What made Frank different was how he viewed collecting. He didn't just see objects, he saw stories. Every item held a memory of a time, a place, or a person. He often spent more time talking with the seller about the history of the item than negotiating the price. He was especially interested in things that showed how Americans once lived. Old tools, forgotten products, strange toys. He treated war memorabilia with deep respect, sometimes donating items to museums if they were connected to soldiers who had sacrificed their lives. That was Frank. He believed these stories should be preserved, not locked away. Frank Fritz spent much of his life fighting something most people had never seen. For over 36 years, he lived with Crohn's disease, a painful and exhausting condition that made everyday life difficult, especially when filming American pickers. His close friend once said Frank had been dealing with the disease since he was around 25 or 30 years old. He did remarkably well, pushing through the pain while millions watched him on TV, never knowing what he was going through. Things improved when he quit drinking and focused on staying sober, but years of stress and illness took their toll. His health deteriorated, and eventually it became too much for his body to bear. When he passed away at 60, many didn't realize just how much he had suffered behind the scenes. The public began to learn about it in 2017. Frank had been driving the wrong way when the police pulled him over. He told them he had been drinking and had taken Xanax, a drug he said was prescribed to treat his anxiety. He failed the sobriety test and was charged with driving under the influence. Later, he explained that his anxiety stemmed from always being watched, always being judged. He said people were watching his every move, and the pressure weighed heavily on him. He avoided jail time by accepting a plea deal, but his reputation had been damaged. Frank Fritz endured many things that no one knew about until the truth was revealed. His life was far from easy, and the struggles he faced are a story that few truly understand. Do you empathize with the pressure he went through? Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to uncover more fascinating and touching secrets. That moment lifted the veil and showed that fame not only broke him down, but also changed him. His friendship with co-star Mike Wolfe began to crumble. By 2021, Frank said they hadn't spoken in 2 years. What really hurt him wasn't the lack of work, but the silence. He had back surgery, and Mike never called. Frank felt the show was always imbalanced, as if Mike was the star and he was just the sidekick. He even joked that it was like being in a band with Steven Tyler. You'll never be the lead. When Mike posted an online message about missing Frank, Frank didn't believe it. He called it fake and said maybe someone else wrote it. He didn't believe Mike ever said anything kind about him in real life. However, after years of tension, they finally reunited in May 2023 during Memorial Day weekend. A mutual friend helped them make it happen. But the pain didn't stop there. During the pandemic, Frank hurt his back moving something at home. He needed surgery, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Lockdowns, isolation, and breakups all happened at once. That's when he became addicted to opioids. At first, it was to manage the pain, but soon it spiraled out of control. Mike Wolfe said it was like watching a storm destroy someone. They tried to help, staged an intervention, begging him to get clean. Frank claimed he was fine, but he wasn't. When the show wanted him back, they asked for a clean drug test. He couldn't pass. That was the final blow to his time on American Pickers. Frank's final episode aired in March 2020. At first, it seemed like he just needed rest to recover. He even said afterward that he never left. He just had back surgery and then COVID-19 hit. But by July 2021, Mike confirmed he would not return. He posted a message wishing Frank all the best, but that was it. Behind the scenes, things were different. Frank had undergone serious surgery. 185 stitches, 2 metal rods in his spine. He said he was ready to come back, fully recovered and eager to work again. But the network had other plans. They didn't bring him back. And according to those close to him, that decision crushed him. He felt forgotten, pushed aside. From that point on, his health continued to worsen. Frank Fritz's life changed on July 14, 2022. That morning, a friend entered Frank's farm in Iowa and found him lying on the floor. He wasn't moving. He couldn't speak. The friend immediately called 911. He might be having a seizure, the friend said. He can't talk to me. Frank, at 59 years old, had suffered a severe stroke. The doctors took him to the hospital, but his brain damage was severe. He had lost most of his ability to move and think clearly. After a month in the hospital, he was transferred to a nursing home. That was just the beginning of a long and painful survival battle. Even when he finally returned home, Frank still required continuous care. His health continued to worsen. There were numerous emergency calls, including one where he had pneumonia and had to go back to the hospital. As the weeks went by, it became clear that Frank no longer had control over his life or finances. In August 2022, the court intervened. They appointed Frank's friend Chris Davis to make personal decisions on his behalf. A bank was assigned to manage his assets, worth approximately $6 million. Court documents clarified the situation. Frank could not care for himself. He couldn't ensure he had food, housing, or even basic medical services. Without help, he risked serious injury or death. But even with help, things weren't easy. Both the Guardian and the bank were under pressure from the court. Judges reviewed their actions every year to ensure Frank was truly being cared for. And then there was the cost. Frank had earned millions of dollars during his time on American Pickers, but his savings quickly vanished. He spent around $30,000 a month on medical care. In total, more than $350,000 a year. His only income at the time was about $60,000 a year from investments. It wasn't enough. Frank needed 24-hour nursing care, special equipment, physical therapy, and treatment for other serious conditions like Crohn's disease and COPD. His close friend, Jerry Jandro, mentioned there were even discussions about auctioning Frank's antiques after he passed away. "I think he'd do really well with an auction." Jerry said his fan community would support that. Over time, Frank's condition worsened. Jerry said visiting him was heartbreaking. One side of Frank's body didn't work at all. He tried to lift his arm and it just dropped, Jerry recalled. Even more painful was that Frank knew exactly what was happening to him. He knew how much he had deteriorated. He couldn't speak like before. He couldn't move, and he couldn't change anything. Jerry believed Frank had lost the will to fight. When people get tired, he said, they often lose the will to live. I truly think he could have lived longer if he hadn't given up. Then the final call came. On September 30th, 2024, Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime co-star on American Pickers, was informed that Frank was quickly declining. Mike rushed to his side. He stayed for an hour, holding Frank's hand, rubbing his chest, whispering to him. "I told him I wasn't mad at him," Mike said. "I told him I loved him." Just before Frank took his final breath, Mike sent him a final message. "Go find your mother. Go find her." At 8:50 p.m., Frank passed away. Mike was there. Frank's mother and her closest friend, Annette Overberlander, were also there. Annette later said Mike never stopped being there for Frank. He was with him at the end of his life. She said that's the way both of them wanted it. When Frank Fritz passed away in September 2024, no one could have imagined what would be found behind the old garage door. Hidden from the public for many years was something remarkable. More than 75 vintage motorcycles, each with a story, each a piece of history. Some looked like they had just rolled off the factory floor. Others were covered in dust, rusted, and clearly waiting for a second chance. The oldest bike was from 1912. Some were even rare prototypes that experts believed had been lost forever. Most people had no idea Frank had quietly collected all these items. Only a few close friends knew the full extent of what he had hidden. But once the news spread, collectors and museums worldwide were buzzing. Many said this could be one of the most significant motorcycle discoveries in decades. As people looked closer, the details became even more astonishing. One bike, the 1922 Ace 4, was bought for only $45,000 in a memorable episode of American Pickers. Now it's worth nearly $200,000. Another standout is the 1939 Indian 4, nicknamed the Aristocrat, valued at over $115,000. There are pre-war Indian Scouts, including a 1928 model with the original paint still intact. Frank also had three 1950s Harley-Davidson Panhead models, each in different stages of restoration. But the biggest surprise was a one-of-a-kind 1947 Indian Chief prototype. Its design was unlike any other known model, and experts say it could be worth over $250,000. But the motorcycles weren't the only thing that made this collection special. Alongside them were handwritten journals, dozens of them, carefully preserved for over 30 years. Frank wrote down everything: where each motorcycle came from, who owned them before, what parts he had to hunt down. He even wrote about the struggles of restoring some bikes, the time he spent in the shop, and the joy he felt when something finally ran again. Sometimes he added small personal notes about how a particular trip made him feel or what it reminded him of. These journals turned the collection into more than just machinery. They told a story, and to collectors, that made everything even more valuable. By the time the full inventory was completed, experts estimated the collection could be worth over $2 million. Some believed it could even surpass $3 million when the auction started, especially with Frank's name attached to everything. Auction houses fought to handle the sale. Everyone knew this wasn't just about buying old bikes. It was about owning a piece of American history, carefully preserved by a man who truly understood its value. But Frank's love for history didn't stop at motorcycles. Hidden in the estate was an old, beat-up truck that at first glance didn't seem special. But this wasn't just any truck. It was the very one that Aerosmith used in their early days, driving from show to show when they were still unknown. Frank and Mike Wolf found it in the Massachusetts woods in 2018, paid $25,000 for it, and restored it. When the band saw it again in 2019, they were utterly amazed. Joe Perry said it was incredible. Ray Tabino, one of the original members, was emotional, recalling the days when they all shared a few bucks after paying for gas and tolls. That truck didn't just carry their gear, it carried their dreams. Then there were other odd items. Frank once bought a giant elephant head from a taxidermy collector for $9,500. The head later went to Jack White of the White Stripes, who exchanged antiques and cash to own it, partly because of his famous album, Elephant. The transaction sparked controversy among animal rights groups, but it showed Frank's willingness to collect things that others wouldn't dare touch. He also owned an original jelly car from the early 1900s, which was once used to advertise the dessert in small towns across the country. That too ended up in a museum. Whether it was music, food, or quirky American items, Frank had a keen eye for what mattered. He even ventured into sci-fi collectibles. In an episode of American Pickers, he and Mike discovered 4 original Yoda prototypes from Star Wars. At first glance, they looked like fan art, but a former Lucasfilm artist confirmed they were authentic. Based on original designs from 1978 and molded after a model inspired by Albert Einstein, Frank got a great deal on them, and each one ended up being worth over $6,000. This is proof that his passion for collecting wasn't limited to motorcycles and signs. He knew that pop culture had its own power. But just as everyone was celebrating Frank's legacy, a legal storm erupted. In February 2025, his father, William Bill Fritz, filed a lawsuit. He claimed that the will submitted in 2023 was a forgery. According to Bill, Frank had never signed it. This document left almost all of Frank's $6 million estate to his friends and caregivers. Bill was not included. He claimed he was the only real family of Frank, the only surviving relative, and that he deserved everything. Court records called for a jury trial to settle the matter. The case quickly became more complicated. Frank had suffered a severe stroke in 2022 and was soon placed under guardianship. A judge at the time ruled that Frank was unable to make decisions for himself. That ruling became the focus of Bill's argument. If Frank couldn't care for himself, how could he sign a legal will? On top of that, Bill claimed he had been kept away from his son in his final years. He asserted they had gone fishing together in St. Thomas and that he had been unfairly pushed aside. Now, the court would decide what was true and what wasn't. As the evidence was presented, everyone was waiting to see how this chapter in Frank Fritz's story would end. But one thing was clear. Frank left behind more than just antiques and motorcycles. He left a legacy built on passion, memories, and a deep love for the past. Whether in a rusted engine or an old truck, he saw stories worth preserving. And now the world was finally seeing them. What do you think about Frank's legacy and the valuable items he left behind? How do you feel about his life and his passion for collecting? Leave a comment with the number 1 if you sympathize with Frank Fritz, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting videos. See you in the next video.